Thank you, Ruba, and thanks to the Arab Organization for the kind invitation and for organizing such important event. I find it really hard, honestly, to speak after the adequate presentations of the speakers. They pretty much covered everything, but I will try to comment on a few points and maybe explain a bit the underlying regime under which all of these crimes are being committed, and impunity is being ensured by Israel. First of all, on what Khalid said, I'd just like to emphasize that the description of the situation in Palestine, or the characterization of it as an apartheid, is not new. It didn't come with the Human Rights Watch. It didn't come with Beit Salem. As a matter of fact, Palestinians like Faisal have been writing about this since the early 60s. The experience of Nakba has been described and always associated with the apartheid regime in South Africa. So I think that's something also Zoe alluded to. It's important to center Palestinian voices. It's important for us as Palestinians to reclaim the narrative. I have to say what I'm saying, I have to be clear. I'm really grateful also for our colleagues in civil society, whether in Israel or international organizations, who always emphasize that the Palestinians have been saying this for decades, and only now Israeli and international civil society have joined the call. So it's important also for us, the Palestinians, to recognize that we're not lacking any qualification or the ability of providing a legal analysis describing our own reality, and this position should be centered. I already shared the link of Al-Haq's apartheid report, which was entitled Israeli Apartheid, a Tool of Zionist Settler Colonialism, exactly what Khalid was saying. But it happens often that even in media, in political speeches, there's reference to these reports, but not to what the Palestinians have been saying. And this really reminded me of what Edward Said wrote in the 80s, a great article entitled Permission to Narrate. It feels like we needed permission to narrate our own struggle as Palestinians, and it's always more credible somehow if an Israeli says it or if an international organization says it. Of course, again, I reiterate that that's not the understanding within our colleagues in Israeli human rights organizations or international organizations. We work together. They recognize that Palestinians have been saying this for forever. So I just wanted to touch upon that, and I think Mark is absolutely right when he said that although these reports came recently, that's what you all know as Palestinians, exactly, because we lived under this apartheid regime. And I think an important thing to elaborate on is how this apartheid regime functions and how it guarantees the impunity. The apartheid regime is basically focused on the denial of the Palestinian people for their right to self-determination. And in order to do that, Israel has strategically fragmented the Palestinian people into at least 4 separate geographic, legal, political, and administrative domains as a tool to impose and maintain its apartheid regime. These 4 domains are Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, who comprise almost 21% of the Israeli population and live as second-class citizens inside Israel, an apartheid regime that is being also imposed on them. The second category is Palestinians in Jerusalem, who live with a precarious residency status that can be revoked at any time, including because of allegations of a breach of allegiance, as preposterous as this may sound. And a colonial occupying power want the occupied population, instead of resisting it, pledge allegiance to it. The third category is the Palestinians in the rest of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, who have been living under military rule, under military occupation for over 55 years. This is the longest occupation in modern history. And the fourth, and I think the most important perhaps category that underline the Palestinian experience is Palestinian refugees, who comprise over half of the Palestinian population, who are outside the Palestinian geography, scattered around the world and in neighboring countries, and internally displaced in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. The Gaza Strip, for example, over 55 or 60% of the people in Gaza are refugees, are not originally from Gaza. And of course, all of those are denied their unalienable right to return. So the Israeli apartheid regime strategic fragmentation ensures that the Palestinian people can never meet, group, live together, or exercise any form of collective rights as a people, particularly their right to self-determination and permanent sovereignty. And this strategic fragmentation is further entrenched through the illegal blockade of the Gaza Strip, which, as the UN described, is an open-air prison. And I think, as understandably how some activists are describing it, it's a big concentration camp where Israel controls every aspect of Palestinian life, and even calculate the calorie intake that Palestinians need in the Gaza Strip to survive, with a policy described as the head right above the water, where you can breathe, but you can't swim, and you can die at the same time. So in addition to that, you have the annexation wall, the so-called apartheid wall, the Israeli permit regime, the checkpoints, physical barriers severely impacting freedom of movement of the Palestinians. And on top of that, you have a whole legal foundation of that apartheid regime. For example, in 2018, Israel enshrined apartheid in its basic law, the so-called the nation state of the Jewish people law, which states that the exercise of the right of self-determination is exclusive to the Jewish people in Israel. So through this entrenchment of settler colonialism and apartheid, Israel denies the Palestinians their permanent sovereignty, including over their natural resources, while of course ensuring unrestricted access to its population and the complicit cooperations in its crimes. So in order to maintain this regime, Israel has to employ some practices, and as a result has to commit crimes, because these let me just highlight one of the most important aspects of how Israel is maintaining its apartheid regime is the systematic impunity within the Israeli judicial system. Israel's legislations and military orders render the Israeli judiciary, including the Supreme Court, as enablers of its apartheid regime, which confer legitimacy on the regime's legal foundation, facilitate the continued perpetuation of these policies and practices, and is designed to produce impunity and prevent Palestinians from effectively challenging the regime. And Israel does that through a wide range of repressive policies, including the widespread systematic use of mass arbitrary detention, excessive use of force, including its shoot to kill policy, torture, collective punishments. And I think each of these topics need a webinar to talk about. But all of these are aimed at oppressing and intimidating the Palestinians and subjugating them. So, for example, if I want to talk about torture has been sanctioned by the Israeli High Court of Justice and has been since the beginning of Israeli occupation, including against detained Palestinian children, has been used and is becoming a standard operating procedure. Of course, collective punishment. If I want to talk about collective punishment, the inhumane practice of withholding Palestinian deceased bodies and not releasing them to their families to mourn them, the blockade of Gaza, also the campaign of intimidation, harassment, and delegitimization of human rights defenders and organizations advocating for Palestinian rights and calling for accountability, including through threats, targeting with notorious Pegasus spyware, travel bans, deportation, and punitive residency revocation, like what happened with our colleague Salah Hamouri from Damir, who is a citizen, a resident of East Jerusalem. He was deported to France. Of course, as you all well aware, in 2021, Israel's defense minister also criminalized 6 Palestinian organizations, including Al-Haq, the one I'm proudly associated with, because of our legitimate human rights work and because of our work exposing Israeli crimes, and in particular because of our cooperation with the ICC, notably since the ICC started its preliminary examination, even before the investigation, Palestinian human rights organizations, including Al-Haq, have been submitting crucial information and evidence to the Office of the Prosecutor. One must not forget that the only access the international community have to the documentation, to the requisite documentation of these crimes, is through these Palestinian organizations that have been criminalized. Israel denies access to special rapporteurs of the United Nations, to commission of inquiries, to any form, any judicial body or any investigative team to enter the occupied Palestinian territories. So the targeting of these organizations represent, I think, in my view, a desperate move of an anxious apartheid regime that wants to conceal its crimes from the international community and failing to do so even with all the oppression and the restrictions. So these laws, policies, and practices are in nature designed to oppress the Palestinians and to affect who try to oppose and challenge Israel's apartheid regime. Therefore, Israel's apartheid regime, in my view, is premised on a promise of impunity to its soldiers to oppress the Palestinians and dehumanize them. Accountability for the apparent serious violations and alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity, I think, is the missing piece in the puzzle. There need to be accountability, including at the International Criminal Court, which has jurisdiction over the situation in Palestine. But most importantly, I think it has a statutory responsibility to investigate those responsible for the most serious crimes, including the crime against humanity of apartheid that I think is widely documented, and there is a growing consensus among the human rights movement as a whole that this situation is, in fact, that of apartheid. And I think until there is accountability, this apartheid regime, unfortunately, will continue. And I'd like to maybe end with a quote, something Benjamin Friends, an international advocate for justice, and he was one of the late living Nuremberg prosecutors. He actually passed away a few weeks ago, and he once said in Nuremberg, while prosecuting Nazis, there can be no peace without justice, and no justice without law, and no meaningful law without a court to decide what is just and what is lawful under any given circumstances. End of quote. And we believe that court, in this case, when you talk about accountability, is the International Criminal Court. So there is, I think, no excuse for the International Criminal Court to delay issuing a arrest warrants anymore. There is need to expedite its investigation and start issuing arrest warrants and live up to its responsibilities as a court of last resort for Palestinian victims who crave justice. Thank you.